I'm also going to focus on how we approach race day and what we do in the days leading up to and around the race in order to try and give you as much guidance as possible. So just to recap, as far as the race feeling goes, I'm going to just run through this quite briefly. I don't want to spend as much time as I did on the previous sessions. If anybody still wants to see what I spoke about in detail, those sessions are recorded and have been uploaded to our YouTube channel. So there you can go and actually see what I spoke about from actually developing and creating a proper fueling strategy for race day. Okay, so I just mentioned previously, and this is really a very big standard when it comes to sports nutrition. Fueling requirements are always based on intensity and duration. And basically, the intensity that we look at is a percentage of maximum heart rate, and that will ultimately determine which zone you're performing in. I just actually haven't asked you guys if you can actually see the slides that I'm putting up on the screen. I am sharing the screen, but just let me know in the chat that you can see the slides there. If somebody can just let me know. Yes, great. Okay, thank you for that. So when it comes to Comrades, I've mentioned many times, sure, you're going to start in the cold hours of the morning. It's going to be very cold. You're obviously going to start off at a very slow and easy pace. The field's going to be very jam-packed. It's going to take you a while to actually get into sort of a bit more of a spread field and be able to get into your pacer zone, unless you're starting with the top guns. And so in the beginning, maybe you will be starting off a little bit in that aerobic zone, zone 2, etc. But over time, and it could happen quite quickly, you're definitely going to move into what I call the primary zone, which is zone 3 and zone 4. And basically that happens for a number of reasons. First of all, the temperature starts to climb. So core body temperature will start to climb. Heart rate will start to become a little bit more elevated because you start to lose a little bit more fluid. You're sweating to try and cool down your engine. And so what happens is, even if you're trying to hold yourself back in zone 2, depending on how long you can hold yourself there from a pace perspective, eventually you're probably going to drift, and we call that cardiac drift, into zone 3 or 4. And that's what I call the primary zones. You want to try and stay away from zone 4 as much as possible. You want to try and stay in zone 2 and 3 as much as possible. But I would say that zone 3 is probably that really primary zone that you're going to sit into, and that's around 70 to 80% of maximum heart rate. Obviously, if you lose an excessive amount of fluid and you're performing at high intensity, you're going to hit those higher zones. Never let your heart rate go into zone 5. It's a death trap. It's going to destroy your race. And if you do it early on, you're in big trouble. So you want to make sure that you really do control the pace. Now, when it comes to your energy system, the pace that you're performing at, okay, and when I talk about pace, I'm really talking about effort. The effort that you're performing at is obviously going to determine how your energy system functions. And so zone 2 is very much what we call a very high sort of fat burn zone, but you do burn off a portion of glycogen, and you can see the fuel tank there. The yellow is fat fuel, the white is the glycogen. Obviously, Comrades is a very long race, so even that little bit of glycogen over time adds up to being quite a fair amount of glycogen. Zone 3 we call glycolytic. There you're burning off a large amount of glycogen. You're also burning off a large amount of fat, but it's more evenly spread. It could be 55, 45%, but there's definitely a large amount of that glycogen fuel tank being utilized. And glycogen fuel tank is what we call our rocket fuel. And obviously, when we utilize that, the only way to actually spare is to make sure that we're consuming carbohydrates and making sure that we're supporting that energy system as much as possible. Even when you're burning off a little bit of glycogen over time, like I said, it adds up. So carbohydrates become a very, very key fuel, and you need to consume them regularly in order to be able to make sure that you are able to support that level of effort over a period of time. Okay. The glycogen fuel tank limited to 2,000 calories. You don't really want to see it deplete. That's what we call hitting the wall. Fat tank, obviously 40,000 calories, but you are going to be utilizing a combination of these fuel tanks, and that's what this graphic shows. Obviously, when you're sitting in zone 1 or 2, what I call the lower carb feed zones, and you're definitely looking more at a fat feeding zone. But as you move into the upper zones, you'll see that there's a spread of usage of those fuel tanks. And so you need to make sure that you're sparing that glycogen tank because it is much smaller, and you want to try and keep that as big as possible, at least all the way to the finish line if you possibly can. Okay. So please, let's try and make sure that that you are consuming fuel on a regular basis and you are able to basically take in what you're burning off. Okay, remember, fuel for effort, carbohydrates equal better performance and recovery. I know a lot of people say that they want a fat fuel with Comrades, but it's not going to stop you from burning off glycogen. Even if you are extremely efficient at burning off a high amount of fat than an average person that actually relies on carbohydrate intake, you're still going to deplete your glycogen over a period of time. And it's very, very important to make sure that you are consuming carbohydrates regardless. I've been keto, I was on a ketogenic diet. It is still very difficult to maintain that very low zone type of a heart rate over many, many hours, especially as the temperatures climb. The route is also very technical, and so you are going to be burning off glycogen no matter what. So you might be able to spare a little bit more glycogen than the average person if you're very fat efficient. And most people actually train themselves to fat efficiency because a lot of athletes, especially runners, train fasted. But carbohydrates are going to be the energy for the day. Okay. When I spoke about fueling strategies, just recap this quickly. You'll notice there the green zone, which is not a green zone for the day. I've put a big cross in the box. Okay, that's less than 60 grams of fuel per hour. That's looking at more the 30 grams of fuel per hour. Where you want to be at Comrades is between that 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And that would be broken down into 30-minute feeds or 20 to 30-minute feeds. 40-minute feeds, I think, are too little. So a lot of people say to me, I'm going to feed every 5 kilometers. I'm saying you can't, because if you're running 5 kilometers and you're running that at 7 or 8 minutes a kilometer, just as an example, that's going to leave you the feed that's 35 to 40 minutes. You want to work on clock-based feeding, and so you'd rather look at a 30-minute feed, wherever that puts you. If it puts you at the 6 kilometer mark or the 7 kilometer mark or the 5 kilometer mark, rather work on time as opposed to pace. Okay. When it comes to protein being utilized as a fuel source, because Comrades is such a long event, absolutely protein does play a benefit. You can break down and convert around 9 to 12 grams of protein per hour into, it can be broken down and utilized. It can be utilized as a fuel substrate, and it does help stabilize blood glucose response, but it also helps you feel satiated. I do get a lot of people asking me questions, why am I so hungry? There's a lot of reasons for that, but this can actually also mitigate a bit of hunger. But the other thing is it can prevent the onset of neogenesis symptoms, which is muscle fatigue, and we've seen that it does help stabilize and provide a lot of energy to the system. But more than that, it actually helps suppress the onset of muscle fatigue over a long period of time. And that process of gluconeogenesis takes place probably around, for some people, maybe 3.5 to 4 hours into an exercise session, and then obviously it can keep on getting worse over time. And the reason being is that your body's utilizing fat as a fuel substrate as well as glycogen and carbohydrates. It's natural carbohydrate stores. And then it just needs to be a bit of a balance. So the body says, okay, I'm going to cannibalize also muscle protein. But if you've got protein in the system, it can utilize that as well. Okay. I'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions on the fueling as well. I will answer. I'm going to be doing a big FAQ at the end. So I won't be spending too long on everything, but there will be a lot of questions answered at the end of the session. Okay, let's have a look at how we need to approach getting close to race day, because we're coming into the week before race day. The first thing I need to stress, and I have been asked this question quite a bit, and actually yesterday an athlete also spoke to me about it, is should I be eating in a calorie deficit at the moment? What should I be doing as I head towards race day? Because a lot of people are still trying to get into what I call race weight. It's too late for that. So don't focus on race weight. Whatever your weight is now, that needs to be your weight on race day. I hope you've trained at that weight. You don't want to be racing at a heavier weight than you've trained at, but you also don't want to be losing weight, because that's just going to put your energy and immune system a little bit at risk, because it means you are eating in a calorie deficit. Right now, obviously, your training has been tapered. When you taper the training, okay, calorie burn rates start to drop, and so you actually need to eat in a calorie, what I call maintenance, and calorie balance. So rather try and eat the same amount of calories that you're burning off on a day-to-day basis. That will help stabilize the energy system, help with recovery, and absolutely look after your immune system as well. The other thing is make sure that your protein intake is a little bit higher. I would aim for, depending on the age of an individual, but probably 2 to 2.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight on a daily basis. And the reason you want to do that is because if you do have a significant amount of muscle damage based on the very high volume of training, and some people say, yeah, but I did my last long run so long ago, it can take a long time to recover from it. Even if you run slowly, there can be microfiber damage, and you want to make sure that you synthesize muscle protein You want to make sure that those muscles are 100% recovered on Comrades Day. You don't want to be at risk of starting that race and then fatiguing because your muscles have not recovered 100%. So protein intake is very vital. Make sure that you are consuming a sufficient amount of protein every day. Revolve your meals around the protein. Make sure that the protein is central to every meal. Add in the carbohydrates and the fat content, I would say probably between 15 and 30% of total caloric intake. And carbs, go for the healthy carbs. High fiber carbs, brown rice, basmati rice, quinoa, sweet potatoes, etc. I would go for things like that. Oats, and try and keep the proteins as lean and clean as possible and make sure that you get in a sufficient amount. Okay, so stabilizing your weight and not gaining weight before race day, and definitely not looking at losing weight before race day. Right, let's have a look at the week before race day. So the week before, which would be basically starting this weekend, you need to make sure that you start to keep your food really clean. And when I say clean, I'm saying don't eat things that are not conducive to what you normally eat from a health perspective during the week. In other words, takeouts and eating out, etc. You've got to be very careful about what you eat. Now, the last thing you want to trigger is, number one, any sort of gastrointestinal distress, and that can be a stomach bug, it can be food poisoning, it can be anything that you're not used to. The last thing you want to do is actually suppress or irritate your energy system or anything else at the moment. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I would avoid alcohol completely. It does mitigate muscle protein synthesis. It actually slows down recovery process. It does also impact sleep. Believe it or not, it doesn't matter when you had the alcohol, it does impact sleep. The most important thing right at the moment is to focus on getting a good night's sleep, and alcohol absolutely takes away quality sleep. I wouldn't overconsume caffeine, especially in the afternoon hours, because that will also impact your sleep. If you are going to have your coffees, etc., rather stick that to the morning. No overeating, especially no overeating at night. You want to get a good night's sleep. Overeating at night can cause metabolic elevation, and that can also disturb your sleep. And then you also want to make sure that you're hydrating properly on a daily basis. One of the things that I do advocate going into a big race like this is to hydrate not just with water, but to actually take in a mineral solution. And that could be 1 or 2 bottles of electrolyte solution on a daily basis. We've got a product called Hydrate, which is quite nice. Little tablet, drop it in a bottle and drink. And it actually really does help top up your hydration level. Fluid is much better absorbed when combined with a mineral and a carbohydrate, so sodium and carb. That's when you maximize fluid absorption. And I would try and maintain a really good hydration status leading into that race. Alcohol also dehydrates, another reason not to look at taking that. A lot of people say coffee dehydrates, but it actually doesn't really dehydrate. You need it as green tea. You can utilize it as some form of hydration. It's very rare that it actually causes dehydration. Obviously, I'm talking if you're overdosing on caffeine, that might be a different story. And some people do, it does irritate some people. There are some people that are intolerant to caffeine. And then, like I said, focus on sleep. So try and get a good night's sleep, get to bed early, and try and make those hours count. Okay. Maintain that through the race week. One of the things that a lot of people say to me is, should I be carb loading? And we can talk about that a little bit. Carb loading is a science. There are professional athletes that utilize it to their benefit. But you've got to understand that carb loading really is there to just top up your glycogen stores. And if your glycogen stores are 2,000 calories and you can carb load them to, there's no ways you will unless you do it really properly, but let's say you even carb loaded them to 2,300 calories. And you are burning off over a 10-hour period or 9-hour period, you're burning off like 700 to 800 calories per hour, of which a really good percentage of that could be glycogen. It's very, very sort of rare that extra a little bit of calories that you carb load on is actually going to make a big impact to this event. If you're running a marathon, different story, but this is an ultra and it's a really big ultra. And because of the amount of burn rate that you're going to be achieving on an hourly basis, I think that the reason to carb load is actually extremely limiting in the benefit it's going to give you. If you're an elite athlete and you're going 5.5, 6 hours, different story. And those guys really do know how to pace themselves and utilize that carbohydrate intake to their benefit. But most people are not at that level. One of the things I also want to say about carb loading is the science of carb loading is a few different methods. One of them is actually depleting your glycogen stores completely, say early on in the week, could be around Tuesday. And then one is that once it's completely depleted, the way they do that is they do very high intensity sessions. They deplete glycogen stores by not consuming any carbohydrates. And then once the glycogen stores are depleted, they then start to take on carbohydrates and load sufficiently towards the event, hoping to top them up even more. If you mistime that, you are in big trouble, because maybe you'll get there in a deficiency, and maybe you also will impact yourself quite negatively leading into the race. The other way to carb load is to actually start to increase carbohydrate intake the day before the event. I'm not a big fan of that. I think a lot of people overdo it, and they do it at the wrong times, and it doesn't work out. And there you should be looking at a certain amount of grammage of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. That can be 9-10 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is a fair amount of carbohydrates to intake. But I wouldn't do that. What I would advise is, very simply, maintain a calorie balance with your macronutrients, stick to your protein targets. And what you do is you drop the fat and you slowly increase the carbohydrates to replace those fat calories. Don't drop the fat completely. You can drop it down to like 20%, 15%, and then to replace that, you can actually push the carbohydrates up. And the way you do that is, for every gram of fat you drop, you can push up 2 grams of carbohydrates, because a gram of fat is 9 calories, while a gram of carbohydrate is 4. So it's more than double the amount. So you can drop the one and you can actually increase the other. And I think that a gradual increase over time as you head towards race day is a way better way of actually getting your carbohydrate intake slightly up without worrying about overloading yourself, maintaining the calorie balance, and it's actually quite easy to do. Okay. Again, keep it clean, especially the 72 hours before. Man, I see people walking around Expo eating a lot of junk food in the food hall and drinking loads of beer. Leave that to your family. Just be very careful. Some people, they love it. They do it every single year. Maybe there's some of you that have run 20, 30 comrades. I don't know. But if you really want a good result and you really want to make sure that you're performing to your true potential, then the nutrition is going to play a very key role. And you might say, yeah, but I've done this every year, whatever. Who knows? You might have been able to cut 20, 30 minutes off your time if you did things a little bit more properly. Reduce fiber intake. One of the things that I do advocate is actually reducing fiber intake. The reason being is that a lot of people are getting what I call pre-race nerves. A lot of people suffer a little bit from IBS. Maybe you don't have a full-blown IBS like proctitis or Crohn's disease or something, but the problem is that when you have a little bit of race nerves, human beings tend to internalize it. The brain speaks to the gut, and the gut takes a little bit of a shake. And then what happens is you start to introduce foods which might be a little bit high in fiber. And fiber is not something that's easily broken down in the gut. The gut has to work pretty hard to try and push it through. And so it can cause some irritation. So I would reduce fiber intake because it can also lead to things like runner's trots, etc. on routes. I would reduce fiber intake. So examples of that is, instead of eating brown bread, go for white bread. Instead of eating whole wheat pasta, go for white pasta. Instead of eating basmati brown rice, go for white rice, like a jasmine. And that would probably be a better food to take in from an energy perspective, and also be a bit easier on the gut. So that's just an example. Avoid foods that you're intolerant to. I know a lot of people that are, let's say, lactose intolerant, yet they'll still drink dairy and eat yogurt and whatever before the race. I would say avoid it completely. Why take a chance and irritate your gut? Even if you're slightly lactose intolerant, rather avoid it. Go for a milk replacement. I know some people don't like them, but you can get rice, oat, almond milk, whatever it is, but go for something that's not going to upset or irritate your gut. Again, alcohol. If you really want a beer to top up on carbs, go with an alcohol-free, like a Peroni, a Zero or something like that, but save the alcohol for afterwards. So like I mentioned, you can slightly up your carbohydrate intake, and then mineral loading. I would actually increase the mineral loading 3 days before. I would want to get to race day with my hydration stores stacked, because the one thing you know is that you are going to lose fluid. So the biggest setback is if you lose excessive fluid on the day. When you are dehydrated, it does lead to a really huge drop in performance. A lot of people get nauseous, they get fatigued, and it just can upset the day. So rather start with a much better hydration status, that it doesn't just taper off like this, and that you can actually keep topping en route and actually maintain a nice level and a nice balance, fluid balance. Okay. I just mentioned 32 GI hydrate there. Whatever you want to do, want to add a salt tablet in, etc., it doesn't matter, but just make sure that you hydrate, and taking in minerals is much better. I would also want to increase my mineral intake. When it comes to hydration, water on its own is not highly absorbed. And remember that even for during the race, you need to take it with sodium and you need to take it with carbohydrates. The tonicity of fluid, in other words, the way it empties the gut, that gastric emptying rate is the highest when you have a small percentage of carbohydrate with sodium and the fluid. It pulls through at a much more rapid rate. I use this analogy. If you think about a blocked drain, you'll notice sometimes that the level drops little by little. That's water on its own. Add sodium to that, it's going to drop more. Add carb and sodium to that, it's going to drop even more quicker. It's like a little bit of a drain clean. So that allows better permeability for the fluid to go through that cell wall and through that membrane. Okay, and then focus on sleep. 72 hours before, like I think Friday night is probably the most important sleep night. The race before, the night before the race is very limited from a sleep perspective. Most people with pre-race nerves battle to fall asleep. Some people have got their ways and their means, but very few people sleep very well because there's a lot of pre-race nerves. So I would say Friday night is a very key night. A lot of people go out, they go to these pasta parties, they overload on pasta, and then also on Saturday they wake up very early and they want to get that run in. They say, I'm waking up early to run because I'm still getting up at the same time as I do on Comrades Day. And I'm like, you're just crazy, man. Go to bed early, or if you go to bed a little bit later, but wake up later. Just maximize the sleep as much as possible because it does equate to better performance on the day. Okay, let's have a look at the day before the race. So this is Saturday. I would say sleep in a bit later if you need to do. Some people don't like to do any activation runs the day before. A lot of people do like to do activation runs, whatever you want to do. I am a fan of doing activation runs, short runs the day before, just to loosen those legs. But you don't have to do it first thing in the morning. You can do it a little bit later. You can get up an hour or two later, maximize your sleep, get it in. Could be a 20, 30-minute little run, and then the rest of the day carries on. Definitely no alcohol, no overeating the day before. Again, don't overeat. We'll talk about, eating properly for the race. Again, hydrate and mineral load. And then at lunchtime, this is where I would say rather increase your carb intake at lunchtime. So there you can go with a little bit of a carb increase. And the reason I say at lunchtime is because at dinner time, a lot of people overload. And I would rather take in a slightly smaller to medium-sized meal at dinner, because if you overload at lunch, at lunchtime, it's not going to impact you from a sleep perspective later on. If you overload at dinner time, and you really overload on food, you're going to elevate your metabolic rate. You're going to lie in bed. You're going to feel a little bit of discomfort. You're going to battle to get to sleep. Okay. Your heart rate's going to be slightly elevated. You're not going to be in a good sleeping way. And if you overhydrate, even in the evening, you're actually going to end up being running backwards and forwards to the loo as well. So I always keep those pre-race meals the night before as small as possible. Why can you do that? Because the most important meal of the day, the most important meal of race day is actually the morning of, which is your pre-race meal. Okay, so try and get a good night's sleep. Wake up in the morning, pre-race meal, whatever that is for you. I advise high carb, low fiber, low fat, a little bit of protein. That's the way to do it. If somebody wants, like somebody said to me, they eat a lot of scrambled eggs on toast. I'm saying make sure that the toast is white bread. Make sure there's more white bread than there is egg. You just need a little bit of protein. You don't even need the fat. You can have egg white if you want, but just maximize the bread from a carbohydrate perspective. You can have oats and banana. We've got a pre-race meal, which is a nice little porridge you can make as well. You can have, whatever is conducive to that in the morning. I know some people like to eat a lot of bananas. Some people like to have banana, honey, Nutella on toast. That's also fine. Just keep that meal focused from a carbohydrate perspective, mainly easily digesting carbohydrates. Simple carbs are probably better. And then also time that meal at least 2.5 to 3.5, 4 hours before the start of the race. The further back you are away from the race start, the bigger that meal can be. And if you're 4 hours away, you could eat like a 700-800 calorie meal. If you're 3 hours away, it could be 600. If you're 2.5 hours away, it could be like 450 to 500. So the closer you get to the race, the smaller that meal has to be, because obviously the digestive system still needs to break that food down, process it, and then allow you to utilize it. You don't want to start feeling very heavy and overloaded. Or you could split the meal up. You might want something small in the morning, and depending if you are staying in Pietermaritzburg or you have to go from Durban to Pietermaritzburg and catch an early shuttle, whatever it is, you can still snack or have a shake or whatever it is on the bus or sip an energy drink. So you can still feed on the way to the route. The most important thing is that you do need to take on that energy in the morning. Okay, pre-race hydration, absolutely, I would say hydrate as well, but don't overhydrate. And the reason I say this is because you know that the portaloos are there, you know that the crowd's there, and in the morning with the cold, I can see you're going to be running up and down to the portaloo because you're overloaded and your bladder's overloaded. So keep the fluid intake to a level that is not going to impact you from a negative perspective. When it comes to caffeine, I'm a big fan of caffeine. You can take in up to 3 to 4, even 3 to 5 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight, and this can be done quite a number of hours before the event. It can help free up FFAs, or free fatty acids as we call them, and that can help benefit you from an energy perspective on the day. Okay. So that's really how we go into race day. When it comes to the fueling, I have spoken about that before. A lot of people say to me, when should the fueling start? It should start 10 to 15 minutes before the race even starts. I would already start taking on some fuel then. And the reason being is that when that gun goes off and that race starts, the last thing you want to think about is actually fueling. The one thing that you do want to think about is finding a comfort zone. It's dark. You don't want to trip. You want to also check that you're in a very crowded area. I mean, those crowds are not spreading out very quickly. So you just want to make sure that you get into this comfort zone and that you are regulating your breathing. And that will be the focus probably for the first 20 to 30 minutes. And from 20 to 30 minutes in, that's where you can actually start the feed. And that's when you should start the feed. Don't delay it. Keep starting clock feed from the beginning. So you start the first feed before the race, and then you feed through the race, but you're giving yourself time to get into that comfort zone and that pace along race route. Okay. So I'm just looking at some questions quickly in the chat, and then I'm going to go to some frequently asked questions. You guys are welcome to ask. So first of all, somebody asked how many hydrate tabs would you take per day from 3 days out? I would drink 3 bottles a day. That's me personally. And the reason being is like I like to get like 1,000 milligrams of sodium in at least on a daily basis. And that's in addition to like my meals. They probably take me up to about 1,500 milligrams of sodium or more from an intake perspective. So I go for 3 bottles, but my last bottle would only be around maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. I wouldn't drink too close to bedtime because that's just going to overload you and it's going to impact your sleep. Somebody said morning of the race, Insure, Banana, Race Pro. You can take any of those. You can mix them all if you want. I think the most important thing is just make sure that you are taking a meal that from a calorie perspective is not excessive in the amount of calories. So it will ultimately depend on the weight of an individual and how many calories they can take in those couple of hours before, and obviously how close to the event as well. Somebody's asked about energy enhanced patches. I don't believe there's such a thing. Maybe it's a vitamin B patch. That's not going to do anything. Your vitamin B levels or your vitamin B levels on the day that you race. B12 is B12, and most people have got normal B12 levels, and these help with energy production as well. So I think that is not going to, for me, keep it simple. There's a lot of people saying this and that. Food is food, carbs are carbs, fats are fats, and proteins are proteins, and I'll just keep it simple. If you take caffeine before a race, do you need to continue throughout, or can I pick? So the thing is you don't. If you load yourself on that caffeine those many hours before the race, you will not have to then keep taking caffeine throughout the race. But during the race, when you start your caffeine feed, then you have to start taking caffeine throughout the race. Okay, that amount of caffeine is taken like 3 to 4 hours before the start. That caffeine reaches peak concentration levels in an hour, but the idea is to free up free fatty acids, is to get that boost into that system. So that has got a very different effect. But during the race, when you are taking caffeine, that can help lower what we call RP, or rate of perceived effort, and that reaches peak concentration levels in 60 minutes. So there you're a lot more sensitive because it's going to increase those levels, and when it starts to drop, you are going to perceive that, you're going to feel it. So that means once you start taking caffeine during the race, you need to consume in under 60 minutes to keep topping off those peak concentration levels. Can you overdo carbs? Have too many gels too? Absolutely, you can overdo carbs. Remember, a lot of you should have, or all of you should have planned your nutrition strategy, tried and tested it during training, and you should know what the volume of carbohydrate intake that you're going to be consuming on the day is going to be conducive to digestive comfort. I work with many athletes, and a lot of them know I can take 75 grams or 90 grams or 60 grams of carbs per hour, no problem, and they stick to it like glue. And that's what you've got to do. If you're only used to taking 50 or 60 grams of carbs in, and suddenly you land up taking 90 grams of carbs, you do not know what your stomach is going to do, and it can land up upsetting you. Okay. I'm just going to pull up quickly here. I've actually got I'll share this. I've got a lot of questions here, and I'll share the questions on the screen so that you can actually see them as well. Here. Can you see this table? Just let me know if you can see this table that I've got up here. If someone can just mention that in the chat. Okay, somebody just asked in the chat, what's the reason some of your brands gels have protein as well as carbs? Specifically, they're ultra endurance or endurance gels. So the amount of protein is very small relative to the carbohydrates. Basically, looking at close to 70 grams of carbs and only 6 grams of protein. That protein will be broken down and utilized as a fuel source, but it really is there to stabilize. And like I said, try and prevent the onset of muscle fatigue, which can happen due to the process of gluconeogenesis. It also provides some stability, and so it works extremely well. Okay, so that's the reason. I mean, those are really endurance event gels. And also, we've got athletes taking up to 150 grams of carbohydrate energy an hour in those gels. They're rapidly absorbed. They really are rapidly absorbed. All right, let's have a look at these questions over here. So, is this an old one? Looks like an old one, actually. Sorry, I just want to make sure I've got the right one up here. There we go. Okay, this is actually the one that I need to share. Sorry, let me reshare this. I'm just going to share this one over here. No, that's not the one either. Sorry, guys. Let me just close this here. Bring up the right one. Yeah. Okay, just give me 1 second. I'll share this. Okay, I think this is the one. Okay, sorry about that. The other one was from last week. Okay, what should I fuel with before the race and from the start to 30 kilometers, 50, 60, and 70? It's going to be my first Comrades. Look, I think the best answer there is to go and have a look at the previous webinar, because any fuel source can be liquid, it can be solid, it can be a mixture, it can be a combination, and you need to decide what that fuel dispensing mechanism is going to be for you. It needs to be broken down into volumetric, and you need to be taking it. I don't look at, like I said, first to 30 Ks, 50 Ks, 60 Ks. I look at 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 120 minutes, and so on. You keep moving through the clock, and that's how you should be feeding. Okay, how to fuel properly to avoid cramps. Cramps can occur from a number of reasons. It can be neuromuscular. In other words, there's just a neuromuscular trigger because your muscles can be overloaded or fatigued. They're not used to a particular pace over a particular period of time. That comes down to conditioning and training. And like I've always said, strength work even helps that. So you cannot not do strength. You can be a runner, but runners still need to do a lot of strength work in order to be able to condition their muscles properly. As far as the nutrition part of it goes, Dehydration can lead to cramping. So the best way to prevent that is to make sure you're properly hydrated. And that would mean taking on a sufficient amount of sodium, carbs, and obviously fluid to keep you properly hydrated. If cramping does occur, the way to deal with it is to stop running, walk through it, stretch through it, take on salt, take on fluid, take on a bit of carbs, and try and see over a period of time. I'd rather walk for 5-10 minutes to try and let it settle while I'm taking on that nutrition. And then I would try and run again and see if it helps. It is going to take time for that fluid to pull through if it is dehydration. And so just make sure that you do give it some time to start acting again. If it is neuromuscular, like for example, we've got a gel called Crampus Salt. It does have a neuromuscular sort of a trigger. It's got a capsicum anum trigger in it, which is like a cayenne. Can it work? Yes, it can work. It's not. There's no sure guarantee that it's going to work, but for a lot of people, it does actually work. How long does one gel last in the body? It doesn't last very long. If you're burning off 800 calories an hour, a gel can be 20 to 25 grams of carbohydrates. It's 100 calories. Boom, 100 calories is gone very quickly. It's why some of us actually consume around 400 to 500 calories of gel equivalent per an hour. So, if you're looking at a gel perspective, if you're taking a 25-gram gel, it could be one every 20 minutes to get your correct intake in, which would end up being 75 grams of carbohydrate energy. And that would at least see you with about 300 calories. And I'd say that would probably be a nominal feed, but I'd say 60 minimum, 240 calories upwards. But once that gel goes into your body, it gets converted very quickly to glucose. That glucose gets transported straight to the muscles, and it is being burnt off quite rapidly. It's not going to sit there for hours. Unless you don't consume any fluid with it and you're just putting concentrate in your stomach, then that can cause stomach issues and you can land up in trouble. So just be wary of that. Somebody's asked about Boom. Boom's a pre-workout. You can utilize it. Obviously, I would take it before the race. You could even take it during. If you wanted to really bomb in 200 milligrams of caffeine, I think it would be fine. Do refill on time or distance? Best strategy is time. Absolutely time. When is the right time to start eating for cramps? You don't start eating for cramps. You don't want to see cramps. So like I said, prevention is better than cure. How much 32-GR porridge suggested before the race? Look, it really depends on an individual. If you go to the back of the tubs, there is a weight time before race volume option to have a look and see exactly how much you should be consuming. When should you be refueling? Every 20 to 30 minutes. Somebody writes here, I'm using 9 Race Pro gels and decanting them in a 500 ml soft flask instead of me carrying them. I note that I can decant 5 comfortably in a flask. Is that fine? Yes, it is. I take 3 Race Pro gels and I decant them actually into a 250, 300 milliliter soft flask. And I've run with 2 soft flasks, which is equivalent to nearly 6 of those gels. And you can actually just measure and consume the volume that you're taking. It's absolutely fine. Just remember, even though they're fluid gels, you still need to take in additional fluid with it. But I think that having a concentrated dispensing mechanism like that is the simplest way to get your energy, and I think it's very, very effective. How many Race Pro gels should I use for this coming 90-kilometer Comrade? Some people use 9, some people use 6, some people use 10. It really depends on the individual, how much your digestive system can handle. How do you know the right amount of fuel that you consume on an hourly basis? It's the maximum amount of grammage of carbohydrates you can consume on an hourly basis without triggering gastrointestinal distress. That is what we call the tipping point. So you want to try and figure that out, but you can't figure it out on race day. So on race day, if you're not sure, rather be conservative. Don't overload it because there's no coming back from that. But if you're taking let's say between 60 and 70 grams per an hour, at least that's nominal. It's not going to overload the system. And you can sort of tell if you're feeding every 30 minutes and you're feeling a little bit hungry, you can always increase it. And when I say increase it, in other words, shorten the feed to 20 minutes so that you get a little bit more in earlier on, and then you can try and balance it and take a little bit more on. So that's the way to try and manage an issue en route. If you're feeling like you're a little bit fatigued and you're feeling this low blood sugar, then you can start to shorten your feeds and try and take on a little bit more over a shorter period of time. But once you've overdone it, it's very difficult to come back from that. If you sprinkle salt to Coke, it reduces sparking. Not really. The reason that that would actually cause sparking is not so much the sugar, the water, etc., that's sitting within the Coke. It's actually the caffeine. So a lot of people don't realize there's caffeine in there. You're taking the caffeine, you having an infrequent consumption, and you're going to hit the downer. So that response is not necessarily hypoglycemic. It can sometimes be the caffeine downer that you're feeling. The other thing is, how many grams of carbohydrates are you actually consuming when you're drinking a premixed drink en route? Okay, that's being given. And that's something that you need to take into account. If you know exactly how many carbs there are in a cup of Coke, and you've got spare caffeine to take with you en route, then you need to add that into your entire fueling strategy. If it's 15 grams of carbs in a cup, as an example, but you're taking 60 grams per an hour, you need to figure out where am I going to get my other 45 grams from, and how am I going to break that down into my feed. So fueling is very much, it's mathematics. It really is a numbers game. For a 12-hour finish, how many grams of carbs should I aim for? Again, it depends on the individual, but I would say at least 60 grams of carbs per an hour. But it depends on what also that level of intensity is, as well as, you know, the weight of an individual. If you weigh 100 kilos and you want to finish in 12 hours, then the level of intensity is going to be quite high because you're carrying a frame over a large distance. Your sweat rate is going to be a lot higher, so you've got a lot more fluid loss when you've got more surface area to lose fluid and you're a lot heavier. Your muscles are working a lot harder. You might need 80 grams, 90 grams per an hour. 60 might be too little for you. So that's just an example of how to think about it. Can I put a 200? Can I put a 32 GR tablet, or let's say hydration tablet, into a soft flask of 200 mils? Must have been a 500 mils. No, you can make a concentrate. You can absolutely make a concentrate. You can put 3-4 tablets in there, and the idea is that you'd have little sips, but you would take water along with it. So the idea is to try and understand how much sodium you're getting per an hour. But I'll tell you this: you don't have to use 32 GR like hydrate tablets, because they are effervescents and they do need to be broken down. If you've got seconds en route that can give you them, well, that's wonderful. And I know a lot of athletes that have got seconds en route. But if you don't have seconds, we have got what I call a carry hydration solution, and that's the Cramposol gel. Cramposol gel is a carry version of hydrate. It's got around 184 milligrams of sodium in a little snap gel, tiny amount of carbs. So you snap it, you drink water with it. It maximizes fluid pull through, and you can have 2 to 3 of those an hour if you wanted. If you didn't have access to salt or any other hydration methods en route, you don't. I mean, the idea is to take maybe one every 45 to 60 minutes with water. But if you are getting very, very hot and you're losing a lot of fluid, you can increase the frequency of those when you're consuming them. So you can take even up to 3 or 4 an hour if you wanted to get a very high sodium intake. Cramposol, okay, somebody's actually just asked about that. Yeah, when do I take it? Take it every hour from the second hour in, I would say, and drink some fluid with it. It's just to help to increase. I'd say prevention better than cure, so I do advocate taking that. Or if you don't have access to Cramposol, then take a salt tablet. Just by the way, 32G, obviously, you do know that there are official nutrition partners of Comrades this year. What are we providing en route? I think it's quite important to actually mention this. 30, 40, 70 kilometers, you've got snap gels, okay? So there's quite a few thousand, I think there's maybe 10,000 snap gels at each one of those tables at 30, 40, and 70. At the 50-kilometer mark, roundabout, where the pot and kettle is, okay, there is a protein shake zone. And we give that specifically in a sachet, pre-mixed, ice cold. So you can grab it and you can just bite it and you can go and take it on the go. And we're going to have plenty of those. That will be at, I think it's around the 50-kilometer mark. And that's absolutely worth taking. So that will be a carbohydrate with a little bit of protein, and the serving size will be good so that the protein intake is sufficient and nominal. And then at around the 63-kilometer mark, so just before you're going to get to Fields Hill, we've got an anti-cramp zone, and there we've got Cramposol gels, which we'll be handing out in that zone as well. So those will be en route, so just take note of that. I plan to use Endure tablets, Endure sports drink, high intensity gels, Cramposol, and Race Pro energy bars during the race. You can use all of those. Just understand the amount of carbs. So like a serving of Endure sports drink is 44 grams of carbs. One tablet of Endure tabs, only 4.4 grams of carbs. So you need like 10 tablets to give you a serving of Endure. So if you are taking tablets, just make sure you understand how many grams of carbs you're taking by how many tablets you're consuming every couple of minutes. And you can split those feeds up. You can replace a gel, for example, with a banana. You can replace half a gel maybe with half a banana. It depends on the size of the banana, etc. But that's quite important to understand. You can use some natural food if you want, but just remember one feed will replace the next. So you could go like a chew, banana, chew, gel, banana, whatever it is, and you can mix those up every 30 minutes. Okay, somebody did say during training, Comrades Marathon experimented with a fueling strategy targeting 70 to 90 grams of carbs per an hour, 5 to 10 grams of protein, and electrolyte production per hour. I use a combination of energy gels. When should I take cramper salt before after cramping? Cramper salt once an hour. Because it's a very low carb gel, it's not going to impact the energy system. This is not an energy gel. It is an electrolyte gel. It's there to provide fluid uptake. So you really want to utilize it to maximize fluid absorption. So you could take it in between the feeds. If you're feeding 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 at 45 minutes or 15 minutes, maybe in the middle of the clock there, you can actually utilize those gels. Spoke about carb loading. I'm not a big fan of it. If you want my protein pancakes, you can come and have a look after the race. I'm definitely not going to be making protein pancakes, but maybe I'll see some of you at the finish line. You can get those recipes actually on my Instagram page or on the 32GR site. You can ask the AI. I only use the gels and cramper salt jellies. Is that okay? Yes, it's absolutely okay, because that's your choice of taste or texture that you enjoy utilizing. Just make sure that the volume of what you're taking in is enough. One bar of chews is 33 grams of carbohydrates. A gel is around 22 grams of carbohydrates. So the combination of the two in an hour is about 55 grams of carbs. Is that going to be enough for you? Maybe not. Maybe you'd need 1.5 gels plus a bar, maybe 1.5 bars plus the gel, etc. International customer, not a fuel. Okay, so that's a very important question. I'm an international customer. I'm coming to run Comrades. I'm not used to the fuel and route, because obviously in the country that they are at, it wouldn't really be seen as a possible brand that's actually there. Firstly, there are options that are very easy on the stomach, and like there are, like, if somebody came to me and said to me, this is the gel brand that I'm utilizing and this is what I've been utilizing for training, I could give them an equivalent of what they would be utilizing, which would have similar kinds of carbohydrate content. I mean, if you're using a 2-to-1 glucose to fructose gel or a 1-to-0.8, etc., there are products that are equivalent in composition. Depending on the carbohydrate, the sodium content, you can find equivalent. I would try to be quite honest. I race overseas a lot. I used to. And I always take my nutrition to race day. It is so long that you can't carry all of it. So I would try and make a plan if there are international secking tables, which there are definitely some of the races. I know that the 32GR Running Club is offering tables en route, but they are providing 32GR product to those people that have taken up that offer. But there are options. If you are at the expo, come talk to me. I'll be there. I'm more than happy to listen to what you've been utilizing, and I can try and guide you on the route. I'm there Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. I will be at the 32GR at the Discam stand. You're more than welcome to come and approach me and ask for some guidance. I'm more than happy to try and help as much as possible. Tapering, we spoke about. Carb loading, I've spoken about week before. There's a lot of questions that we've already spoken about. Somebody asked, how long does it take for supercarb protein drink to kick in? It is immediate. That cluster detection gets pulled through rapidly. I mean, any kind of carbohydrate intake, you're not talking even lots of minutes. You're talking sometimes seconds for some of these products, and it starts to get absorbed quite quickly. The protein does not have an effect on your kidneys. If you've got a healthy kidney function, you'll be fine. The one thing that does worry me about kidney function are those people that decide to pop non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs en route. Please do not do that. Do not do that. I really beg you. No Miprodol, no Cataflam, no Panados and ibuprofen or anything like that, or Advils. It is so dangerous. If you want kidney failure, that is a sure way of playing Russian roulette and asking for trouble. Taking a bit of protein is absolutely not going to cause an impact on kidney function. And with people that have not got what we call CKD, or chronic kidney disease, we have seen that even high protein intakes has got no impact on kidney function whatsoever. Your kidneys will be fine. Worry about other things that could impact your kidneys, like I said, NSAIDs. I'm on a keto banting diet. Best Comrades time was when I was keto banting diet, fueling and race day. I know I must get carbs in, gradually getting carbs. So it's a very difficult one. I mean, I was keto for years, and one of the problems is that when I went back to fueling with carbohydrates, because it's just like that, it's that like train low, race high kind of a scenario. And if you train low and you race high, in other words, you take in very little carbohydrates in the race, then you go and increase the amount of carbohydrates during the race. Your digestive system is very untrained and it doesn't know really what to do with that, because you've sort of harnessed a different energy system. An energy system is more utilized to utilizing ketones as a source of energy than carbohydrates being converted into ultimately ATP, as an energy source. So the problem is that you actually do need to train your gut. Like I would start to introduce carbs like quite a few weeks before to try and adapt it and even utilize it during some training sessions, because you can hit that tipping point quite quickly. For some people like that, 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrates could be way too much, when they've been doing some fat fueling. So I would say that you would need to try and get in as soon as possible and try and adapt the gut a little bit to that. I have had athletes, and I'm just going to say this, that have come to me and said, I'm doing keto. And then I've pulled out my blood testing kit and I've tested them. I've taken a blood test and I'm like, you're not ketogenic. Your ketone levels are not high enough. So if you are on a banting diet or a keto diet, just make 100% sure that you are in a state of ketosis, because many athletes that I've blood tested over the years that said that they are in a keto diet actually ended up not being in a keto diet. Based on what they were consuming, their glucose levels were too high for them to be in a proper state of ketosis, and sometimes that's skewed. So when I've seen people going more on a fat sort of fueling kind of a strategy, because based on the fact that they thought they were keto and they weren't running blood tests to check that they were actually in ketosis, they ended up hitting the wall big time on the day because their glycogen stores just depleted completely. They weren't that efficient at actually utilizing fat as a fuel source. So just be careful of that. How many solid meals can you have? You can have as many as your stomach can handle, I guess. I mean, if you're talking about solid foods, they're absolutely fine. I wouldn't eat anything that is heavy on the gut, so anything very heavy. If you're going to eat anything solid like white potato or banana, then that's a little bit easier. It's broken down and digested en route, and it's actually quite nice. I would avoid high fiber fruit, something like dates, for example. I wouldn't overeat it because I think that the fiber and the fructose can overload you and you can end up in a little bit of trouble. Supplements to carry carbohydrates, caffeine, and electrolytes. That's the only supplements I can think of on race day. Okay, somebody asked how many Ks of fueling again I stress. Clock feed, muscle cramps I spoke about. There's a lot of questions here. Look, a lot of people say they battle with certain amounts of intake and they've tried various brands. And I think that the biggest problem is that you really do need to train the gut. If you think about it, and I use this analogy quite a lot, is that if you're an English speaker and then suddenly you want to speak a new language, whether it's Spanish or French or Italian or whatever it is, you've got to learn that language. And to learn that language is going to take some time. It's going to take, first of all, associating yourself with people that are fluent in that particular language, understanding nouns, pronouns, verbs, simple sentence structures. And it's going to take you a while to learn to develop those sentence structures. And it can take weeks and months to start to develop the basics. And then obviously you become more and more fluent the more you speak. Training your gut is very much the same thing. You are ingesting carbohydrates, and you might not be used to ingesting a particular combination of carbs because certain carbs maybe speak different languages, and maybe you're not actually speaking the language of carbohydrate. Maybe you're speaking the language of fat fueling because you've been doing too much faster training and not enough fuel training. And so your body really does need to learn how to process those carbohydrates efficiently. And so that's a language that your body needs to learn over time. And so it is going to take some time to practice during training. So I always say to people, give yourself at least 4 to 6 months of practicing fueling strategies before the big day, because that's the only way to really train your gut. The last time I raced was actually end of 23. I did an half Ironman overseas, and it was a process. That race was the end of November, and in March I'd already started my fueling strategy. I'd started at 60 grams of carbs per hour, and I built myself up to 115 grams of carbs per hour for that race. And I practiced over and over and over again. And that just shows you how long in advance you can train yourself to actually take on a particular amount. I've got a very sensitive stomach. It took a very particular fuel type for me. And they didn't, even though we sponsored that Ironman event, they didn't have the product in our range that I was utilizing en route. And so I took product to route with me because that's what I trained on. It's what worked for me. And so I took it to race day. I don't like to change anything on the course. Protein, like I said, I think it's definitely needed. And I would say that that's why we put it out on course at the 50-kilometer mark, the protein shakes. It's a carb protein shake. Obviously, it's not a high amount of protein because the body does need to break it down and utilize it. So we put a nominal amount in there, which can be broken down nicely over a period of the hour after consumption. But I think it does play a really big benefit. And we've seen it over the years. I've stood on the course. I've seconded people for the last 13 years. And I've seen how, even with the elite athletes, that protein carb combination has worked such wonders for them. It's actually the Race Pro gel was developed on Comrades. Race Pro was developed because of Comrades testing over more than a decade of testing on athletes. It just is one of those products that works so well. And we've seen that those two macros, obviously high carbs, small amount of protein, we've seen how well it works together. Any limits to the maximum number of gels? The only limit is your digestive system. That's the limiting factor. How much can you take without causing an issue? Frequency, 30 minutes, 20 minutes, depending on the size, but you can mix it up. Can you mix gels with solids like banana and potatoes? You can. Just make sure what you consume has been utilized, it's gone, and you move on to the next thing. Don't mix things together, because every gel, every chew, every bar, any product is designed to have a specific functionality, and that functionality is the way it's processed in the gut, the way it's broken down, the way it's absorbed and provisioned. So if you mix something, if you take a very fast-acting sort of carbohydrate and a very slow-acting carb and you mix them together, obviously you're going to impact the absorption rates. And so rather take the one, let it finish, and then move to the other. And that's where that clock feeding comes in. Sure. Okay, I've answered a lot of these questions. Is it too late to introduce new fueling? It's never too late to introduce fueling. It depends really on what you did previously and how similar it is to what your body's trained to, you know. So that's the most important thing. But I'd need to assess on a person-by-person basis. I wouldn't want to thumb suck, and I wouldn't want to put your race at risk. So somebody has written here, something to assist with energy and avoid a running stomach. Yeah, so if you get a running stomach, you know, in some cases, I've seen people that are maybe fructose intolerant, and the amount of fructose they're consuming relative to the carbohydrate ingestion is, the percentage is too high. So they can cause stomach issues, and they'll end up actually causing irritation of the gut, and they end up actually in the bushes. There are people that say to me that take, I've forgotten the name now, but it's obviously a diarrhea blocker, and I've just forgotten the name of the Imodium. I was thinking about Imodium. Sorry, just slipped my mind for a sec. I would advise against it, because if you're going to block the gut, you're also going to block what you're consuming from being absorbed sufficiently. So I think that taking these blockers is just going to cause even more havoc, and you're going to have an energy depletion along the route. You need to try and understand way before the event what causes those runners' trots, why you're getting them. Is it product related? Is it pre-race nerves? Is it high fiber? Or combined with that, is there something that you've consumed? It could be spice. It could be maybe you had a steak and you're running on meat, which is still being processed and digested during there, and your digestive system's under stress. It's very difficult to say, but I always analyze individuals' eating habits 48, 24 hours before the race and then during the race to see what could have been the trigger, and then you need to start a process of elimination. If someone is always attacked by cramps, what supplement should they take? Is there a shortage? Look, cramping, like I said, there's various reasons. Some people do have a susceptibility to cramping, and sometimes there could be a mineral shortfall. The only way you picked it up is by running a proper blood panel and just checking. You can check red cell magnesium as an example. You can check a lot of different mineral levels, and you can see what those are. And if there is a deficiency, then yes, consuming a mineral to elevate it could mitigate the onset of cramping, if that is the cause. But we would have to identify what the cause is. I'm a big fan of running bloods. I love running blood panels. I think it's bloods don't lie, and you can see a lot from an individual's point of view. Somebody's asked how to pace the first half. I'm a big fan of negative splits on the down run. The first half is very hard. Pace yourself, be conservative, and remember every single bit that you can save in that first half is going to see you in the second half. We know, and some of the very big comrade runners have called the bottom of Fields Hill the graveyard, and Barry Holland is one of them. That I listened to him speaking about a week and a half ago, and it absolutely is. I would say just take it easy down the hill, short stride lengths, don't overstride. Huge muscle impact when you're overstriding, especially down a steep hill. You know, obviously, if you're going down a hill and you're going to overstride, the drop is so much higher, so that when the foot hits the ground, the impact and forces to the body is going to create a significant amount of what I call impact and muscle damage, and those forces you're not going to get away from. So shorter stride lengths down the hills. Another thing that I advocate to athletes is if they're going to do, I am a fan of run-walk strategy, so maybe even timing those 30-minute feeds to do a bit of a walkthrough. It's not going to slow down your overall time. I think you get a nice drop in heart rate, legs can recover, you flush them a little bit. It also gives you the time to focus and take on nutrition, and that can be a 30-second to a 60-second walk. Overall, it's not going to really impact your total time. It probably benefit you, allow you to finish a bit faster. But if you can, try and maybe time those walks. If you're worried about time loss, is try and time the walks on a hill as opposed to flats or downhills. And that can sometimes also be quite beneficial. Somebody says I'm vegan. Plenty of vegan options. Our entire range is vegan, except for the bars, the protein bars. But I wouldn't eat a protein bar like that en route because it's too high in protein and it won't be broken down and utilized. The protein intake is just way too high in a single bar. Somebody's written here, it's my third year running Comrades. I begin to incorporate increase in caloric intake over the years. It feels though I now need a lot more calories to get through the endurance runs than ever before. Look, if you've run it over 3 years, you're probably a little bit more of an efficient runner. You've maybe, hopefully, a better runner. You've progressed. Maybe the level of intensity you're performing at is a lot higher than what you were used to. And so, yes, I mean, in early days, I would also consume maybe between 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour. And, as I started to become a better athlete, eventually I started to increase the carbohydrate intake, and the body will need it, So, like I say, the higher you can get from a calorie intake to not causing gastrointestinal distress, the better it is. And we see that's where the world's going with sports nutrition. It's how many carbs can you take in without causing GI distress, and will they benefit you? Absolutely. But to go for a single day event like this and go for more than 90 grams of carbs per hour, I don't think is necessary. The only benefit of taking something like 120 grams of carbs per hour compared to 90 is that we have seen lower levels of like creatine kinase, which CK levels can show damage in the body, better liver function, for example. So we're actually seeing much better post-race or post-exercise recovery from a high carbohydrate intake, saying 120 compared to 90 grams. And so if you're doing back-to-back or stage racing, then there's a benefit for looking at that much higher carbohydrate intake. things like the Tour de France. That's why the guys are aiming for that 120 or more per an hour, because the benefit is recovering from stage to stage. Comrades is a single day event. I really don't think there's going to be any kind of an issue there from taking 90 grams per hour. I think that's more than enough. Somebody says, do I really need gels to complete a race? You don't have to have gels only to complete a race. You can use a mix of products. You need to use what is good for you from a taste, texture point of view, and that you can stomach, obviously. What's my point of having sips of beer? Alcohol-free beer, please. Alcohol is a toxin. The body wants to get rid of it. Why would you consume alcohol during the race? I know there are some crazies out there that like to do it, but there is no scientific evidence to aid performance, the opposite. If you can get alcohol-free, then take it. If you don't like sweet and you like something a little bit more savory. Imodium I spoke about. Okay, a lot of fueling questions which I've spoken about, and really the previous webinars explained that in a lot of detail, so it's worth going and looking at them. They are on our YouTube channel. Somebody did ask on the 32GR YouTube channel. Okay, I've spoken about the 3 days and race morning intake, carbohydrates leading into the race. Oh, somebody mentioned, okay, this is something worth talking about, nausea. What's the cause? Also have no appetite during the race. Okay, so look, nausea can be brought on primarily by two things. If you overeat, I mean, to think about it, if you take chocolate, and eat, and you sit there, you can feel nauseous from overeating that. So if you are consuming a huge amount of gels and you're not burning it off and you're not processing it, it's not being pulled through, it can lead to a little bit of nausea. Chances are, is that the reason? Probably a Comrades, not really. I haven't seen people really overeat. I've actually seen them more underconsume than anything else. Like I said, if you take a gel, you need to take in some fluid with it. If it's a very thick gel, you need to take in more fluid. If it's a fluid gel, a little bit less fluid, but that will help the pull through. You need to create what we call sort of like an isotonic kind of environment where that fluid and that energy get pulled through the system and utilized. Where a lot of people do feel nauseous is excessive fluid loss. So if you land up losing a large amount of fluid, and percentages can differ between people from what fluid loss will cause nausea, it depends on the individual. But when you lose a sufficient amount of fluid, you can feel very nauseous and fatigued. And at that stage, nobody wants to eat anything, never mind drink anything. I mean, you just feel in an absolutely bad space. The way to deal with that is to take on salt and take on fluid, a little bit of carbs, but really to get the fluid back in the system and try and get your hydration status back up. That is what's going to get rid of that nausea. And it can take a fair amount of fluid and salt in order to be able to get that status, that fluid sort of sodium, that balance in place. So that's probably the biggest cause, I think, of nausea that I've seen, especially in ultra distance events like this. Another thing I want to speak about is how do you know if you've overloaded, and I've spoken about this in previous webinars, is if you've overloaded on fluid and you've taken too much, you actually feel it sitting in your stomach. You feel it sloshing around. You feel that fluid buildup. We call that the washing machine effect. And you're running and you can actually even hear it. If you listen very carefully, you can feel it squishing around. At that stage, you need to stop taking fluid, take on salt, take on some carbs, let that fluid be emptied from the stomach, add the drain cleaner in there, which is a little bit of carb and salt, and get it out. Once it's emptied, you can start rehydrating with fluid again. So just take note of that. You don't want to overhydrate either. Yeah, so nausea after the race, again, I would say is probably severe dehydration. I wouldn't say it's the fueling. I'd say it's probably more fluid loss than anything else. And the way you would know that as well is generally you can also end up getting a drop in blood pressure and you start to get really cold and you start to shiver. That's definitely fluid loss as well. At the end of the race, I would have somebody waiting there with electrolyte solutions for me, and I would have them concentrated because you really want to finish that run and you want to start to take on fluid immediately. That's the biggest thing to take on. Okay. Right. Solid food. It doesn't really matter how much solid food. Some people I know they don't take any solid food. They just take gels the entire route. I just want to see. I see there are some new. Just by the way, somebody asked about biltong. Listen, for those that international people, biltong is jerky or dried meat with salt on. The actual biltong is not good. Okay. The the salt is what's going to make you feel better. That's what's doing it. So when you eat the biltong, that little bit of protein, plus the salt, plus the fluid, that's going to help pull through. That's what's making you feel good, is that saltiness. Don't overdo it on that meat, because that meat's going to impact your digestive system. It's going to take a long time to process. Like I said, protein 9 to 12 grams an hour. So if you go and eat an excessive amount of biltong, you really are going to overstress the digestive system. So keep the pieces very small and spaced very far apart. But I would say the saltiest biltong is probably the best biltong, if you ask me. Um, Somebody said they haven't used anything on Comrades. Bit of a fail. What should they do? I would start at 60 grams of carbs per hour at that end, splitting 30 grams or 20 grams every 20 minutes, or 30 grams every 30 minutes. Somebody said, can I put 9 carb gels into two 500 ml soft flask? Yes, absolutely. You can do it. Just remember to take fluid a little bit. Would it be advised to take BCA mix en route? So BCA, same as taking in protein en route. I would say that, if you're taking a protein that's got branch chain amino acids in, because proteins are, BCAs are leucine, isoleucine, valine, and they aminos. So it's a similar concept of taking protein en route. And so that's absolutely fine if you want to do that. They just are extremely bitter, I guess, and you just got to make sure that they sit well with the stomach. But I'm a fan of just taking something with all the protein, all the amino acids. It will provide you the isoleucine, leucine, and valine within that structure. But if you're used to using BCAAs and you have been taking it, then stick to what works for you, and that will actually help also hopefully mitigate the onset of gluconeogenesis symptoms. And it is actually the leucine that is the most important part there. Somebody just asked, when is creatine useful? Creatine is useful to take every single day for the rest of your life, because there's a lot of positive benefits for it. Not just cognitive function and digestive health, but obviously the improvement of gaining lean muscle, maybe even topping up a little bit more glycogen, and obviously allowing with pace and power. But you do need to take it daily. You don't just take it on race day. You take it every single day. It's not going to benefit you for the race. It benefits you when you take it consecutively every single day. I recommend 5 grams daily. And if you have got severe digestive issues, creatine monohydrate is bound to a water molecule. You can use HCl, and that's bound to a different kind of a molecule, which actually allows for a little bit mild absorption. You would take maybe less, but it can prevent the onset of gastrointestinal distress. But I'd say creatine monohydrate is probably the best. Okay, I think that's it. Unless there's any more questions, you can let me know. I hope the session has been valuable. The only thing that I would want to say is that if you do have any other questions, you're welcome. I'll just put up the email address here. You're welcome to email coach@32gr.com. I do try and get to a lot of these emails, but next week I will be in Durban from Tuesday, and I will not be able to access a lot of emails for response. So when I'm at Expo next week, I'll be setting up when I'm there. The best way to get hold of me would be to come to the Expo stand, and if you want to talk to me about your feeding strategy, more than happy to do so. In the meantime, just some words of advice. Just try and focus on the nutrition and the sleep part. Like I said, hydration, eating clean, and getting a good sleep. I would avoid also crowded places at the moment, especially because with change in season here, a lot of bugs are floating around. And so I would try and just stay healthy as much as possible. You don't want to end up getting sick now. The most important thing is to get to race day as healthy as possible. And then just try and bed down your fueling strategy, beforehand. Just make sure that you've thought about the timing of where you're going to take everything, how you're going to carry things. In previous webinars, I've actually mentioned, somebody said, how do I carry everything on me? I've given some recommendations for a fuel belt, which I've tried and tested. And many athletes I've worked with over the years have also tried and tested it. And that is a Forza race belt. If anybody wants, they can just email me and I can email them the link to their site. They're also going to have a standard Comrades, by the way. But that race belt is the most unbelievable one. You can fit so much in it. I mean, I fitted 9 gels in and a GoPro, and it sits on the hips. It doesn't sit around the belly area. So there's no discomfort there. I actually love it. And it's very, very light. And